Hello, I'm Jordan Peacock, CEO of Becoming Machinic. I have with me Caleb Shingledecker, my co-founder, and Liam Allan, who worked with us on producing NAPTIME. We're going to talk to Liam and Caleb and get a little bit under the hood as to how this project came to be, why it was designed the way it was, and how we hope the community will be able to benefit from it. Liam, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit here.
Cool. So my name is Liam Allan. I actually run my own business as Works at Barry, but also do some consulting for Siding Group and also run a startup company to build software as well. So I'm kind of in a mixed bag, but my general industry is IBMI and primarily focusing on node.js as my topic, but I have background in RPG as well. So.
And Caleb, do you want to give a little bit of your background on the AI as well?
Yes. Hi, I'm Caleb Shingledecker. I have done Java and CLLE development on the I since, I don't know, around 2009. So it's been a while. So on the Java side, I've done a lot of cross-platform development, doing writing applications that work on both the I and off the I, either on Linux or Windows. A lot of those have interacted with the system services using the JT Open and or other methods. Off the I, I've worked doing Java development on primarily the I series and Linux since right around 2009, and yeah.
Yeah, we originally had the need. So with Becoming Machinic, most of our stuff runs in the cloud at machinic.io. Last year, we started adding support for virtual appliances, but we had a number of clients who had core business applications running on the IBM I that they wanted bidirectional integration with either of those platforms. And there are solutions, you know, Liam had mentioned node.js. You know, there's different ways to configure things on that platform to support secure web service calls. But a lot of, in my experience at least, a lot of people don't have that stuff implemented and configured correctly yet. It's getting more common, but it isn't more common. It isn't pervasive. And so Caleb and I were aiming for what's a drop-in solution, because we didn't want to spend a bunch of time on implementations dealing with the peculiarities of people's systems. And the ideal for us was, let's have a library that we can just slap on their system and go with it. So that was the original kind of constraint. And Liam, when we approached you and you started thinking about it, how did you think through the architecture and the constraints and which tools to use?
Well, you know, it was a while ago, but I remember, originally we were thinking about using Node, and I remember briefly because the requirement was actually just sending a request with a, you know, JSON body, couple of properties in it, pretty simple. And I mean, Node would have been fine, but again, you mentioned the complexity of, you know, getting Node set up as one thing, making sure they're on a newer version of the operating system, things like that. And you know, this is stuff that RPG's been able to do for years now, primarily because of the database. You know, we are, you know, RPG is the driver of the functionality, but you know, a lot of the stuff like the base 64 encoding and actually sending the request and building the JSON body, it's all done through the database. Fortunately, we can do that. So, you know, it's not something that a lot of people are doing yet because, well, there are a few different libraries to use, you know, when building JSON and sending requests. There's lots of, you know, libraries written in ILEC that you can use in RPG, but I think the options that I chose, again, with the simplest just to get it running, was use all the database tools. It's all built in. You don't need any external dependencies, and it just works. I remember that, it was a while ago.
Well, and by database in this context, for those unfamiliar with the platform, DB2 is sort of integrated right in as a base part of the OS on this platform. So it's a little different from some of your Unix systems.
But it is also different from DB2 LEW. It's DB2 for I. and it's also from DB2 for Z as well. 2 different things, 3 different things. Two different things, 3 different things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it shares a family resemblance.
yeah, it does. Only in the name though.
So then we ended up, building this out, built out the library, and we tested it against one of our systems, sending requests to it, and we were sending attachments as well, taking attachments from the IFS. What were some of the peculiarities that? So the IFS is the Unix-like file system where you can store actual files as opposed to the library object structure of the general OS. How did that change? What were the DB2 tools like for that?
So it's interesting because really you probably are the only client I'd ever used the built-in base64 functions. Now I do believe that they are part of the entire DB2 family. So really all it does is there's 2 binary files on the IFS. In our case, they were PDFs. And so what we could do is read those using some DB2 user-defined functions. We could actually read the content of the PDF and have it as a variable, a blob variable in our program. And luckily, we could also base64 encode those and stick them right into the JSON property. Now, this is stuff that hasn't really been done. Not a lot of people are doing with the database. It's quite strange to say that your database is encoding files and sending requests. Usually, the database is not doing that type of work, but believe it or not, is also the easiest way to do it in an RPG program. So that's really the interesting part, is we're using, tools in the database that isn't particularly common.
But so I don't think you're using the database base64 encoder though, correct?
No, do you know what? Oh, that's what originally we were. Originally we were, that's right. And then there were actually some limitations of it. Now I remember it was the limitation.
We ran into some sort of size limitation where once we exceeded a certain size, it would cut off the data. And then it was weird because we were getting like encrypted data, and it took a little bit to figure out, or not encrypted data, truncated data, which took a little bit to figure out. So we ended up externalizing the base64 encoding.
Right. And so instead, it now actually uses a paste program to base64 encode the PDF, and then brings the content of the base64 into the RPG program before putting it as the property value in the program. Yeah.
Yeah, paste is another one of those interesting features that's kind of like a sort of AIX virtualization inside of the OS.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
I remember trying to compile GhostScript, and this was back in like 2009 or something like that. And so you had to build the entire universe for it, but at least it was in principle possible to compile any open source thing into that platform.
Yeah, Paste definitely has gotten a lot better in the last 2 or 3 years because, previously, again, people were either downloading RPMs for AIX, or people had been building RPMs for IBMI, and then people would bring them onto the platform, just all the binaries themselves. But IBM in the last 2 years have been actually creating the binaries specifically for IBMI Paste, which is quite nice of them actually. So it's a way to get people
that saves a lot of work.
Oh God, it saves a lot of work.
Did you guys hit limitations with the variable sizes as you're building the JSON objects and adding the base64 encoded file attachments as part of the payload?
I believe at the start we probably did, but it was just a case of just make it bigger. So
yeah, there is an upper limit to the size of files that we can send, which is limited because off the top of my head, I think we have to pack the entire converted data into a single variable. So, which there's an upper limit on. I don't remember exactly what it is, but as long as we stay within that variable size, basically there's no issues. If we exceed that, I don't remember what there was an issue with that. But if I remember right, for some reason I remember if the PDF file was within, I think 6 or 7 megs, were good to go. If it got larger than that, we started running into issues.
Yeah, I remember that too. And I think there was 2 reasons for it. I think one, well, I mean, who sends a 16 megabyte request over over HTTPS? And then I think it was actually, was there a limitation in the web actually API itself as well?
Yeah, I believe that the limitation was that there's an upper limit in the maximum size of variable that you can set in RPG, and since it's passing between environments, you're restricted to that limit.
Right. Yeah. So I think we set the limit to. I mean, I could have
pretty large.
It was pretty large. It was. I don't remember the number specifically, but I do remember it. I do remember making it bigger at one point. So.
Yeah.
Well, I have the repository here. I'm going to share my screen with the GitHub repository, and we broke things into a couple commands. So if I come over here, we have that send request command, which is more general, and then here we have a do PDF check command that is calling send request. Do you guys want to talk about how that separation is designed?
Yeah, I'd love to actually. So
and I can go to whichever files you want. So just, tell me where to go. I'll be your hands.
Well, moral of the story here, base is really the base of the library itself. So base actually does the majority of the requests. So as you can see, line 7 through 13 is all the parameters to the program itself. You pass in the type of API that it is, and I believe to start with we do only support get and post. And, I mean, it's pretty straightforward to add more, but I think we start with those. You pass an endpoint, the header, the body, and there's an output parameter for status as well. And that's really the base. So the send request command just calls this program, and then so it's pretty straightforward. And I believe send PDF check also calls the base and then passes in all that information. So if you go to the 4 file down, and then scroll down just
base
a little bit.
CLLE is included.
And if you scroll down to the bottom here,
Yep,
there it is, line 80. We call the base, and we pass in the type, the URL, the header, and we actually pass an address to the body because it can grow. So we just pass the pointer to it. And that's really how it sends requests. The rest of this application is just building. It's just building the actual request itself. So line 78 is actually what's building the JSON body here. So and above that we have the code that actually creates the base 64. Yeah, I'm
creates some random files, file names, does the conversion, pulls everything together into a single JSON object basically, and then sends it off and then gets the result.
Yeah, and obviously, these are sample endpoints, and this authorization token will not work. But in production, you just point it to your valid machine.io instance with your token.
And that's probably an additional thing that we can call out is on line 43 there. It does build like the header, the HTTP header data. So that could be replaced with any header, and the format here is you actually pass it like an XML type structure, and it actually converts it to the correct thing that's expected when the request goes out.
Yep. Good times.
Awesome. How would you see this being potentially extended if people decide to run with it?
For me, I think adding more request types, like it needs a delete, a put, things like that. I think, and they're pretty straightforward to add as well. And I also think at some point, I remember originally when we were working with this, is I really, really hated that you would have to pass in XML as the headers. Hated it. Still hate it now, actually, with that API.
Yeah, it's definitely not the most intuitive when you're like making a JSON request, but you're passing XML into the for the header.
What was the reason for that constraint?
It's a DB2. It's a just DB2 thing. It's just the way the API is. And at some point, what I would love to do is make it so you could just pass in what headers really look like and then have them translate to XML automatically. So you wouldn't have to worry about that.
Yep, and to do that, we would basically just require kind of another layer of code between the call and the database portion that makes the request. So
yep. That's something I think could be improved on for sure. Is that it's not passing in XML for the headers; it's actually just passing in a real header, a real set of headers like you would in a real API. Cool.
Yeah, so, even if it's just like a set of key value pairs.
Yep.
Then it would have, so then the program could then convert that into XML, which the database could then accept. That would definitely be an improvement. Also, adding more methods, because again, right now we simply have get and post. Now, adding additional methods to that would be pretty easy, because get and post are kind of cover those main cases. In get and post basically covered everything that we needed, so we figured that we would add the others as needed in the future.
Yeah, and actually something, I think one more thing additionally is that there is stuff in the database now that actually allows you to pass JSON output. So maybe just an additional program that would help do that maybe would be cool.
Is that, as of like what version of the OS is that available? Do you know?
I think, well, as you can, I'm actually using a lot of the JSON functions in some of the, in SENDREQ, send PDF, do PDF check, sorry.
Yeah.
So I think they're mid 7.3, not early 7.3. I think they're one of the TRs in 7.3 is where all the JSON functions are available for sure. So couldn't tell you which one though, but they're in there. I think that could be a nice feature for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, and I think that, most of this was just seeing, hey, can this even be done? And if so, like, what are the constraints? And, seeing this brought to life was really exciting to see that. Yes, as strange as some of the decisions were, I mean, like the XML headers to the JSON, like, okay, yeah, it can be a little bit more seamless, but it works, and it works effectively, and it works really smoothly. So I was quite happy with the result.
Me too. It was fun to work on. So I'm just something different to work on, really, isn't it? It's not, it was kind of like R&D, but with a good excuse behind it. So
yeah,
I love that.
Well, hey, and let's give you a moment to pitch what you're working on right now. We were talking a little bit about the IL editor before, and anything else that you've got?
What am I working on? One of the bigger projects, I'm working on two kind of main client projects right now. One of them is a big set of Node.js. It's a big Node.js app for a backend of a mobile app that is talking to IBM I. It's calling a lot of stored procedures and a lot of functions to pass back data to the mobile app. It also does, all the order entry, handles sending emails, does a lot of that. And then for that same client, actually, just last week, I wrote something very similar to do PDF check. I actually wrote kind of like an SDK in RPG to send emails, but they have their own email service. So basically you just fill out all these properties in this JSON and send it in a request, and it sends an email using their email service, which is really cool. All written in RPG as well. That was fun. And then the other big project that I'm working on is actually automating deployment of RPG changes. So the start of the project was migrating this huge app into Git, all the source code, and then working with tools to use GitLab to automate, compiling changes on their development system and production system as well. So those two things really are the main projects that I'm working on right now.
Awesome. And Caleb, do you want to give a brief synopsis as to what we're doing with like Machinic.io, Nomad, and maybe your stuff with Kafka? And then we can wrap up this recording.
Yes. One of the things that that I've been working on recently, I'll start with the Kafka one, is putting together a Kafka stream type framework, loosely based off of Kafka streams, but a little bit more flexible in terms of what the input and output is. And then I'm getting pretty close on that. Once that's put together, I want to add multiple potential sources, such as one of the ones on my list is to be able to send data to it via like a data queue from the AS400. So that would allow like a spool file or some sort of data to be shipped into a process that or trigger a process that can then do processing and output data to Kafka or to another source. Again, it's kind of built around Kafka, but the idea is it's not limited to Kafka in terms of the input or output. For other things that we have going with Machinic.io, we also have kind of a more automated application put together that we have a couple customers live on for just doing fully automated processes. We can trigger it from a REST call or from a data queue, and then just run through, do the processing, and output the data wherever it's needed.
The link to the GitHub repository is in the video description. If your organization needs business process integration across diverse systems, call us at 612-428-0415 or email sales@machinic.io.